My next guest is a social critic and provocateur who's not afraid to take on the president. He made headlines earlier this month when he was arrested during a protest in Ferguson, Missouri. And in his new book, Prophetic Fire, he laments the lack of black leaders in America today while praising the leaders he admires. Cornel West, welcome to Greater Boston.
It's a blessing for me, blessing for me.
Pleasure to have you here. So let's talk about one of the most significant leaders in America today, one who you don't necessarily profile, but referencing President Obama, you write, with the black middle class losing nearly 60% of its wealth, the black working class devastated with stagnating wages and increasing prices, and the black poor ravaged by massive unemployment, decrepit schools, indecent housing, and hyper-incarceration in the new Jim Crow, the age of Obama looks bleak through the lens of the black prophetic tradition. And that's a pretty heavy indictment. I mean, how much of a failure do you consider the Obama presidency?
Well, you know, Brother Jed, I'm very blessed to be part of the great tradition of telling the truth of Beacon Press, of James Baldwin, Marion Wright Edelman, Daniel Ellsberg, Herbert Marcuse. And the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. So you're talking about poor people of all colors. I zero in first on poor black and working class black. And it's not just Barack Obama, it's the system as a whole. Neoliberal regime, financialized, privatized, militarized. Financialized, big money, big banks rule. Privatized, an attack on public education, public life. But militarized, drones dropping bombs on innocent children.
He's the one everybody goes to. He's the one you're always asked about because you're not shy about criticizing the president. And he's the one I would assume you expect to rein in all of what you just spoke about.
Well, at least to use as much of his leverage as he can. He's got structural constraints. Every president has structural constraints. But one would have thought he wouldn't have brought in a Larry Summers or a Tim Geithner, who were extensions of Wall Street in that regard. He would not have allowed for the drones to continue to proliferate, and certainly would not have allowed for mass surveillance. The James Risens, so many others who are fearful of telling the truth, using the Espionage Act to incarcerate Sister Chelsea Manning, and of course we know about Edward Snowden. So from the black prophetic tradition, we're saying what is missing in not just black leadership, in American leadership: integrity, honesty, decency, truth-telling, and most importantly, a willingness to cut against the grain and focus on poor and working people.
Why do you think that hasn't happened? The president is now almost midway through his presidency. Yeah. You might think that he has no one to be accountable anymore if he's going to be accountable to the big business, the corporations, voters.
Well, you would hope that he'd be accountable to the truth and justice, but most importantly, the groups that are focusing on truth and justice. Look, for example, at Ferguson. As you know, I was just blessed to be there. You got young leaders, Sister Ashley Yates and Tef Poe and Tori Russell and Alexis Templeton and others. These are voices that need to be taken seriously. They're dealing with arbitrary police power, not just in Ferguson, it's in Boston, New York, Chicago, Detroit. And it's not a black issue, it's an issue of fairness and justice, morality. And as a Christian, I think it's an issue of spirituality. What kind of person, what kind of nation do we want to be?
Well, let's talk about Ferguson a little bit. You've also criticized the Reverend Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton for being in the media, but at the same time, you went to Ferguson, you say, specifically to be arrested in the protest earlier this month.
That's right, because I didn't go to give a speech. People would rather see a sermon than hear a sermon. And I didn't go as a leader. I went as a lover of the young black folk. I want to let them know the Curtis Mayfields, the Nina Simones, the Gil Scott-Herons, as well as the Martin Kings and others, and those in this book, Ida B. Wells, Ella Baker. They were part of a caravan of love, and justice is what love looks like in public. You pursue justice. Why? Because when you love the folk, you hate the fact that they're being treated unjustly.
But did you determine, in order to be an influence to these young leaders, that you had to get the spotlight that Sharpton and Jackson also use?
Well, I went to stand alongside them, and I also told them that I refused to go on media in that context unless there was a young leader alongside me. Because, of course, I can't control the media, you know, and they obsessed with these superficial celebrities, you know what I mean? And I easily get subsumed under celebrity, but I refuse to be a superficial celebrity. I'm going to be a celebrity who will use whatever I can, including this celebrity status, as a way of putting the spotlight on poor people, on working people.
What do you make of the autopsy results that just came out this week, the official autopsy results, which of course are already in dispute, but say that he was shot at close range, there was some sort of assault that was happening inside the officer's vehicle, that he did have marijuana in his blood. So the suggestion being there is a lot of culpability on Michael Brown's part.
Well, I think we want a transparent process. We want a fair trial. But in the process of ensuring that there is transparency and fairness, the policeman ought to be arrested. He's on paid leave. You know what I mean? All this time he's getting paid and he's already killed somebody. Now, we'll determine whether it was murder and whether it was intentional. Sure, we got to have a fair process. But the idea of him just being off scot-free, and it's just not him. You know, you got Clinton Allen in Dallas. You got Kenneth Chamberlain in White Plains. You got Oscar Grant in Oakland. We have a long list. This thing is systemic. And it's an issue that has to be talked about, not just as an isolated item, as something that has to do with fairness and equality and justice as it affects all Americans of all colors.
Do you think there'll be justice with the grand jury that will return their
well, you
decision?
know, I'm a prisoner of hope. You know what I mean? My beloved daughter, Zaytun, sometimes says, I'm tired the noble, but what seems to be lost causes, because when you're fighting for poor and working people, it is the way of the cross. It's not one that's highly popular, and it's certainly not one that has easy victory. But as long as it has integrity and high quality, it's worthwhile. I think she agrees, and I agree too.
In your book, you cite about 6 leaders who you really idealize as the great leaders, but they're leaders that we haven't seen in generations. So do you feel that there are these types of leaders, Malcolm X, Ella Baker, do they exist today?
I think they do. I think when we look at the text and you say to yourself, oh, now I see what's missing. Maybe I ought to spend less time with Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and much more time with Philip Agnew and Reverend William Barber II, with these young leaders who I talked about, with the legacies of the Ella Bakers, who are at grassroots levels, and not on television. I mean, one of my roles is on TV to keep track of the ones who are not on TV, because that's where you often find the quality.
Well, Cornel West, the book is Black Prophetic Fire. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a blessing for me. You stay strong, my dear brother.
Thank you.